Welcome to this edition of the G-Spot, where we leverage your genius, your grace, and your greatness to create the life you desire. And I am, of course, your host, Jenny P., founder of the House of Preeminence and the G-Spot podcast. And it is my absolute delight and thrill to introduce you to somebody extremely special today. Now, I just want to preamble that by saying, you know, a lot of change makers, my audience in the House of Preeminence, a lot of transformative leaders, coaches, consultants have done so much work on themselves. And then every now and then something comes along that is like the elephant in the room. It is that thing that nobody else has been talking about, that you realize that you need more than anything else. And when my next guest sent me her book, I was one of those change makers, because I was like, oh my goodness. I think I might as well just go back to the drawing board and start all over again on what I think I know about transformation and communication and relationships. So this is going to be an epic episode. It's going to be an epic-sode. I have the great pleasure to introduce you the author of this incredible book, The Boundary Boss. Now, this is more than a book, ladies and gentlemen. This is something you need to take intravenously and never keep far from you. It will rock your world. It's rocking mine. I'm part of the way through it. And it has got some outstanding reviews from really very, very established luminaries, which gives you a clue to the quality it is. She has been helping people with these issues and many more for over 20 years. She helps everybody from CEOs to celebrities to Fortune 500 CEOs. It is my enormous pleasure to welcome the Boundary Boss herself, Teri Cole.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm so excited to be here.
So this is a book that has been wanting to be written for a very, very, very long time. Now, you say the word boundaries, but as you were explaining to me just before we got on, boundaries is what? It's this incredible ripple effect, you know, that we have not been equipped. So what are boundaries?
So the way that I describe it and how I teach it is that having healthy boundaries is you knowing your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, and having the capability of communicating those things clearly and concisely when you want to.
Gosh, is there a magic wand? Is there a magic wand? Because, well, certainly for our generation, and maybe this is other generations, is this wasn't in our education.
Right.
This wasn't in our education.
And in fact, you know, Jenny, it's the opposite. So meaning if you were raised as a woman in particular, we were pretty much raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents, right? Like this is what got us positive feedback in our lives. Many of us were raised to be good girls, quote unquote, which translated to don't make waves, don't be a troublemaker, don't be a drama queen. You know, where's my happy girl? Turn that frown around. Like I could keep going, I won't. But we know what the messages were. And the idea of what is feminine, the idea of what is what a good woman does is all about being self-sacrificing. And so that's what we learned. So you go through life thinking that you're being loving by saying yes when you want to say no. We want to be nice, right? We don't. And how many times do you say or think, I don't want them to think, or I don't want them to feel, which really means you are now trampling on someone else's side of the street, because how you think and how you feel is your side of the street. And that's really the only one that we can control. So I think there's so much important backstory for each one of us. We all have what I describe in the book as a downloaded boundary blueprint, because we were all raised in different families, countries, cultures. But that is in your unconscious mind, which is basically a schema or a paradigm of the appropriate or proper way to relate to boundaries. So if you had a maternal impactor, let's say, who was a people pleaser, then you learned that that's what being a woman is. Being nice, putting other people above yourself, prioritizing others' wants, needs, desires over you, helping people who need help. Because really, if we're looking at more traditional gender roles, women have been the bridgers, the assuagers, the soothers of the world, and that has changed plenty. But I can tell you that I've had women in over 200 countries take my Boundary Bootcamp course, which actually I'm doing another one in October. And there's not one country, not from the Middle East to South America to all over Europe. Nobody has ever said, oh, yes, I learned this in school, or I learned this from my family of origin. So we're really starting at a deficit when it comes to boundaries.
So this is a cultural thing, a humanitarian thing.
Right. But bad boundaries, what I've discovered once I became a psychotherapist. So I was in entertainment for a bunch of years as an agent negotiating contracts for celebrities and supermodels. But I wasn't really happy in that world. And that world is not a hotbed of mental health, and just so many disordered boundaries in entertainment because you're kind of friends with your clients. It's really the line is very blurred. And I couldn't believe how much therapy helped me in my own life, and how little I knew about healthy personal and professional boundaries, what they were, why they matter. And so when I started getting to that in my own personal evolution, I was like, there's got to be something better. Like, this can't be my dharma. Even though I loved entertainment, it was exciting, it was fun, but I really felt like there's got to be something more meaningful for me that I can be doing with my life than making celebrities and supermodels richer, right? That didn't feel that satisfying. And when I became a psychotherapist, I just, quit my job kind of at the height of my, according to my father, at the height of my career, and went to NYU to get my master's. When I started my practice and started seeing all of these high functioning women, like getting it done in the world, right? Like making things happen. But I also saw this pain point. And no matter what their presenting problem was, whether it was like their family of origin issues, or they wanted to get a divorce, or they're having some addiction stuff, I could connect those dots backwards to this lack of this essential skill set. That, the subtitle of the book is The Essential Guide to Talk True, Be Seen, and Finally Live Free. Because when you have disordered boundaries, and let's talk a little bit about that, if that's okay. Like, what does it mean to have disordered boundaries? Because you could have boundaries that are too loose, which are called porous boundaries, or you could have boundaries that are too rigid, which are called rigid boundaries. And what we want is there's a sweet spot in the middle of being able to be assertive, but tell the truth about how we feel and what we want. And so if you were raised as a people pleaser, then telling the truth if someone else wouldn't like it is very challenging. So we find ways around that. But every time we do that, we are abandoning ourselves, and we are abandoning our truth and how we feel. And really the biggest, tragedy, I guess I would say, in living a life of disordered boundaries is that after saying yes, when you really kind of want to say no for a long period of time, or feeling resentful, feeling like other people are entitled, what ends up happening is that the people in your life who you love, they don't actually know you. So how, because when you think about it, your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, those are the essential components that make you uniquely you, that make me uniquely me. So how can anyone authentically really love us if they don't actually know us. And that's a tragedy, not just for your relationships, but for the world, right? Because we need the magic that you have to bring, the authentic magic that you have to bring, which is your true self.
And so many people don't know themselves who their true self is.
Yes, which is actually a big, it's interesting in the book, the way that I lay it out. We start with, the background of boundaries, what they are, the different categories, because you have physical boundaries, which is your body, sexual boundaries, material boundaries, emotional boundaries. There's a bunch of categories where we need boundaries. But one of the first big exercises, because the book is not just a book, it actually walks you through the process, because I didn't want to have to also have a workbook. Like, I was like, let this be one-stop shopping, that if someone says, I would like to have healthier boundaries, I would like to feel more comfortable or secure sharing my preferences and my desires, my limits, my deal breakers, that's what this book will show you. So one of the first big exercises that I share is the okay and not okay list, where I have readers going through every area of their life: personal, professional, friends, financial, physical, wherever you are, really doing an assessment of what is working in my life right now, what feels good, what do I like, what is the way that I want it to be, and what isn't. Because so much of the time in my therapy practice, when I would say, okay, well, let's talk about this, mostly women wouldn't know. They would literally just say, I don't know, I really never thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, we're going to think about it now. And you're going to see this as a living, breathing document, that the more you dive into um, becoming fluent in the language of boundaries, the more you will start to naturally see the things that are not working for you, because there are so many things that we could fix relatively easily in our own lives. We just don't think to prioritize our preferences, whether it's maybe you don't like the lighting in your office, every time you flip that caustic bright light overhead light on, you're like, change that. That would be something on your list. And you're like, oh, maybe I could get a floor lamp, or maybe I could put a softer bulb in there. It would probably take all of 7 minutes. And yet it will give you hours and hours and hours of not feeling constricted. So again, we have to keep our own side of the street clean. So much of the process of becoming masterful with boundaries is going in and really getting to know yourself, forgiving yourself, accepting your past, and then falling madly and deeply in love with yourself. Then we can look to the outside, right? But we really have to know ourselves first, because how can you know what boundary conversations you need to have? And again, another thing I want to say, Jen, on this is it's really important that there are so many myths around boundaries, where people think that to become a boundary boss, quote unquote, you need to be caustic or mean, rejecting, you're saying no to people all the time, you're selfish, you're self-centered, you're dramatic, all of these things, which is not true, because the book is not called How to Become a Boundary Bully, right? A boss is someone who is masterful at what they're doing it with ease and grace, doing it in your own style. So part of what I wanted to provide, and I did provide in the book, is language. There's a whole chapter on just scripts. Some of the scripts are very straightforward. Some of the scripts, I use humor, because in my own life, a little levity goes a long way. So I don't look at it, when people talk about truth, when I'm talking about truth, to talk true, it also means we're being discerning with who we're talking true to, and how truthful do we need to be. Not everyone needs to know your most tender heart, right? That's not appropriate. So if you're in a work situation and you need to handle it, and you need to tell someone you didn't like something, that's going to be a different conversation, because you'll provide maybe no context in that request. Oh, hey, I'd like to make a simple request, Betty, that you not talk while I'm giving my presentation in the meeting because I found it very distracting. Can we agree that you won't do that, basically? But if it were a personal relationship, you would want to provide context because, or I would, because I want the people in my life to know me. So getting really clear between the difference between providing context, which is sharing information to have a deeper understanding, is not the same as convincing someone that you have a right to have that boundary. So there is a lot of discernment that we do up front because you have to know who you're dealing with, right? So I've created this step-by-step process where you create a proactive boundary success plan, basically, because you know the players in your life. If anybody listening right now, if I said, who are the more difficult people in your life? You wouldn't be like, I don't know. You would absolutely know. So we would approach someone who is contrary normally, or who is defensive normally. We would approach them in a different way than we would approach someone who is very open, or someone who is very collaborative about what you want and you with what they want, you know? So I think that there's a lot of factors to consider, but why don't we just just bring it on down to something that's simple right now, where some folks listening, or at least certainly for me in my 20s, I was quite a people pleaser, right? It was very difficult for me to say no if someone wanted me to do something for them or asked me to, could they borrow something? I felt like I needed a really damn good reason to say no. And that simply me wanting to say no when I was younger wasn't a good enough reason. I think it's a fine reason now, but I didn't, So what we really want to start with, if you're listening and you're like, I don't even know where to start, which is where a lot of people feel, we're just going to start with curbing the instant yes, right? Being mindful. You can say for the next 4 to 7 days, anytime someone asks you anything, a decision you need to make, if you would normally react by saying, okay, yeah, sounds good. Even if it doesn't sound good to you, I'm going to give you a couple of things that you're going to say instead, and you're going to buy time, because nobody needs an instant answer from you. We apply that. I mean, unless your house is on fire, like, and the fireman says you want to leave. Yeah, the answer is yes. Generally speaking, unless you're dealing with minor kids or there's an actual emergency, we put this pressure on ourselves that, like, we have to give them an answer right now, but you don't. And people look to us, right? We are setting the bar in our lives for how other people treat us. So this is why I always start with your relationship to yourself, because if you have a bad relationship with yourself, if you have a low self-opinion, if you talk badly about yourself inside and or outside, you will inevitably attract others who agree with that low self-assessment. So it's really important that we recognize our relationship to ourselves is setting the bar for every other relationship in our life. So we really got to get right with that. And you have a right to think about things. You don't owe anyone an immediate response. So for the next 4 to 7 days, if you want to join, if you want to do this little experiment, when someone asks you to do something, you're going to say, oh, thanks for thinking of me. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Or, so nice of you. I need to check with my partner, my roommate, whoever. I have a 24-hour decision-making policy. I'll let you know tomorrow. That's another thing you could say, right? I mean, it's true. I do have minimally a 24-hour decision-making policy. But this is for people who are very people-pleasing. This makes it so much easier to come back if you need to come back and deliver a no, because it feels really challenging. If you already say yes, it feels really challenging to come back and deliver a no. But what happens is if you really don't want to do the thing, do you know how you can like find a way to get out of the thing at the last minute? You might end up with a faux migraine. You might go, but begrudgingly. You do the thing, but like you're kind of pissed. Maybe you're talking about that person. I can't believe Betty invited me to another one of those stupid chef parties at her house. Like, how many of those things do I need to go to? I don't want to buy any more chef products from her. Hi, say no. Right. So instead of vilifying the asker, we need to strengthen the answerer, which is you. And it's okay if Betty asks you and you can, and maybe you really love Betty, you can say, hey, I'm always a yes to you, my friend, but I got to be a no to the chef party. I've done two. That's all I can do. That's it. Right. And we can still be loving in doing that. Now, that's how I would do it, with more humor, but you don't have to. You can just say, I can't make it, without a reason. You don't have to give an explanation. And if we can slow down and give ourselves this time by not giving instant answers, you can give answers that are so much more aligned with who you are, how you feel, what you want. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. So while you've been talking, I'm thinking to myself, well, and it was also my experience of working through the book and going, oh my goodness, it's not just kind of people pleasing and being clear about your own decisions, is you suddenly realize a lot of the things in your life are actually that you've acquiesced to just because there weren't any boundaries, and then they suddenly look around and you go, and oh my goodness, where do I start? So what my question is, Teri, is what happens if the light comes on, you realize there are events, circumstances in your life, in your relationships, in your arrangement, in your, I don't know, in your bank account, in your wardrobe,
Mm-hmm.
that you have allowed to arrive at this point, and because you're kind of touching your truth with this tool, if you would, what do you deal with first? What do you deal with first? You might want to, like, do you want to like rip everything apart and just totally reinvent your life, or it's like, where do you start?
Well, here's the thing. We don't need to torch the village, not necessary. And here's the thing. A lot of people feel overwhelmed in the beginning when you start to awaken to potentially the lack of boundaries or the disordered boundaries that you've been using in your life. But what I want to say to anyone who is feeling that way is just take a deep breath. Here's the thing. It doesn't all have to happen today. You're going to take your time. I will ask you to do an inventory. So you're just going to take a deep breath, get in what I call your Zen den, a little Zen place to chill out. And you're just going to go through the circumstances, the relationships, your business, your friendships, and you're going to write down the top, however many, could be 5, could be 25, where you feel the most resentment, where you feel the most put upon, where you feel the most unseen, where you feel the most angry about, because again, we're not looking to blame anyone. And even when we go through the childhood stuff, because in the book we do, because we need to, we kind of got to go back to the scene of the crime to a degree for data information, not for like, oh, can't wait to blame my parental units, because it's not that. I mean, we're all grown up, it's our lives now. But I want you to understand that there's a reason, many, many reasons why this might be very painful or a struggle for you. And you are not alone and nothing is wrong with you. It's like expecting yourself to be fluent in a language that nobody taught you. You wouldn't be mad at yourself for not waking up fluent in Russian, right? So we're going, but no, the good news on all of this is that you can learn. And I wrote a step-by-step guide so you can. So we're going to really, that urgency that comes up when you think about, oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm going to tell you to breathe into that space. And I just want you to write out, what are the top places, relationships, people, circumstances where you feel resentful, where you feel that what you've agreed to is not aligned with your true heart's desire, with what you want. Keeping in mind, any of us who are in long-term relationships, if you have kids, of course, in life, there are things that we do that we don't want to do because we're in a partnership and our partner really wants to do it, or because we have kids and we need to get in the car and go pick them up from ballet because they're done. So I'm not talking about those things. Of course, all of us have obligations, and all of us are required in some ways to compromise if we're going to be in relationship with other human beings. But that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm really talking about, where did we not even try to get our needs met or to negotiate for what we want because we were raised to think that it was sort of an unseemly thing to do, or because we're afraid. There's you guys can go to boundarybossbook.com, and there I have a boundary quiz that you can take. And it's only 13 questions, super easy, totally free, but it'll give you a baseline functioning. And there's archetypes that I've created because over 25 years of being a psychotherapist, I've seen the different ways that disordered boundaries can present. So you can be like the peacekeeper, or the chameleon, or the pushover, or the ice queen, or the powerhouse, because the another misconception is that the only disordered boundaries are someone who's too much of a pushover. That's not true, because disordered boundaries can also express themselves in being too forceful, in that, if the ice queen, if that's your archetype, then if people don't want to go along with the way you're doing something, you have an idea, you're like, I don't care, I'll do it without you. Like, it's my way or the highway. And that is also a disordered boundary. If you can't have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you without becoming really upset, meaning even if it's political differences or whatever, that's also a disordered boundary. Because when we're healthier with our boundaries, we realize, I have a right to my boundaries, my thoughts, my feelings. The other person has a right to their boundaries, their thoughts, their feelings, and we are not the same people. So if we look at emotional boundaries, when we have disordered emotional boundaries, a lot of times we take responsibility for things that are not ours. We feel overly responsible for the feeling states or the decisions or the outcomes of other people. And that's a disordered boundary, because we're sort of merging with them, and it's not our thing, right? That's their thing. So, and codependency is also something that I talk quite a lot about in the book, because it is also an epidemic. And yet I found that with my clients, they were all kind of ballers, right? They're like masters of the universe doing their thing. So they didn't identify with the term codependent. They were like, I don't think so. I think you're wrong. I'm not. Everyone's dependent on me, lady. I'm the one making all the dough, making all the decisions, making sure the kids get to camp and wherever, and the doctors and the dentist and the school and the PTO. Me. I'm not dependent. So I knew that there had to be something different, because it was such a phenomenon. It was such an epidemic. And it was exactly the flavor of codependency that I experienced in my own life. So I knew it so well. So I was like, I have to change this, because they need to be able to identify it. So I changed it to high functioning codependency. And suddenly my clients were like, oh yeah, definitely that. So what is high functioning codependency? It's basically being overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the decisions, right? The circumstances of the people in your life, to the detriment of your own internal peace, maybe your physical well-being, your financial well-being. Because listen, we're all invested in the people that we love. So it has to be to the detriment where, and if you're wondering, if you're like, well, I have no idea, how can I know? Well, I'll tell you right now how you can know. If something is happening to your best friend and they're in a bad situation, do you feel an urgency? Like, what is your level of urgency around fixing, quote unquote, your pal's situation? Are you immediately calling lawyers, getting on Google, thinking of things like, are you compelled to fix the other person's problem? Do you jump into action? That is high functioning codependency. And the reason, I want you to imagine it, that it's like, because you're so capable. This is what high functioning codependency, at least for my clients and the women in my courses, is that these women were so high functioning that nobody would look at them. They're like, she's definitely got it all together. No doubt. She's doing it all. It's like they said about, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, right? She was doing everything Fred Astaire was doing except backwards and in heels. That's what high functioning codependency is, where you are the rock. People do come to you. You do have great advice. You are very smart. You are an incredible problem solver. But when we're doing this in many relationships, we don't end up knowing the people in our life because we are centering ourselves in their problems rather than being supportive. Like, what do you think you should do? Or I'm here to support you. How can I best support you? Rather than fixing, but it's our own anxiety around there being a problem, any problem, that is driving us to want to fix it. So that is what high functioning codependency is. And I think it's different than regular codependency, because with regular codependency, there's always a lot of talk about addiction and being an enabler. And, think of Codependent No More, right? From Melody Beattie. It's a seminal text. It's still amazing. But my clients did not feel identified with that. And so what I'm finding with the book already being out in the world, is that there are so many women being like, oh my gosh, I'm totally a high functioning codependent and I didn't know it. So at least we now have a name. And I'm walking you through some steps where you can start to step back from things that you don't need to be doing. Get better at delegating. Stop micromanaging. Get really clear about how much emotional labor you are doing in your family, in your friend group, at work, which if you're the person who's always organizing all the things and making sure that, at dinner, you're like, okay, everybody owes, let me get out my calculator, right? You're the one, even though all the other people you are with also have phones and also have calculators, then that's telling you that you feel there's a compulsion. Because really, any kind of codependency, whether it's high functioning or not, this is a covert or overt bid for control. We don't like things to be messy. We don't like others to be in pain. We don't want there to be a problem. But you can literally only do that for so long, because I would have people coming into my practice, and myself, I ended up getting cancer, and I definitely think that I'm okay now, thank God. But that cancer diagnosis was a huge wake-up call in my early 30s for me. And I just wouldn't stop, right? And the universe, I feel like, gave me something where I would have no choice but to stop and reevaluate. Oh, and trust me, I did. And that really did change my life. You physically can't do it forever. And in your 20s, it's way easier than in your 50s. But I would have women coming into my practice in their 5th, 6th, 7th decade of life being like, okay, I've checked all the boxes. Kids are on track to go to good schools, got some money in the bank. My partner's okay. I still like them. Go to Soul Cycle, see my friends, travel once in a while. Like, I have a question. Is this all there is? Is this the way I'm supposed to feel? And how they're feeling is kind of empty. And if we are just subscribing to what we think we must do, to what other people want us to do, how satisfying is that going to be after 5 decades, 4 decades, 3 decades? Not very satisfying. It's not very satisfying in the moment, but it really gets tired if you're doing it for a really long time.
Goodness gracious. I want to ask you so many questions and can't in this particular occasion. So many things are coming up there. I've got a couple of things. When you talked about this high achieving, is that what you call it? No, not is a high functioning codependency, and it's an overt desire for control. does that mean that it's mutual, that the other person in the codependency is also in the same dynamic?
Well, it's overt and covert, right?
Overt
Because
and covert, yeah.
most of us don't even know that we're doing it. We know we're doing it. We don't know why. Well, the other person is playing their part, right? Because you can only be 50% of the dynamic in a relationship, and the other person can only be 50%. So what ends up happening, though, if we are high functioning and we overfunction in our relationships, we have a tendency to attract underfunctioners. So yes, the other person is colluding. I think a lot of times the high functioning codependent to a degree is leading. But when I was in it before I knew what it was, I wouldn't have thought I was leading. I would have thought I was just cleaning up the messes that other people were making of their lives, not knowing it wasn't my side of the street, not knowing it wasn't my mess to clean up. I really thought it was. And I've also seen many, many times that if you are this high functioning codependent, and if you get into a relationship with someone who is capable, perfectly capable person doing whatever they're doing, and if you continue to say, I got it, I'll do it. They're like, oh, do you need help? You're like, no, I got it, because either you want it done a very particular way, or because you're just so used to doing everything. I mean, I used to not even let the taxi guy put my bag in the trunk. He'd be getting out. I'm like, I got it. Don't worry about it. Why? Let him do his job. Packing, a grocery store. I'm like, no, it's okay. Go help someone else. I got it. Why we got to get it all? I have no idea. Like, it's like, I didn't want to be a burden to others. I wanted to be well liked. Maybe I really don't know. I just know that it becomes a pattern. And whatever initially, there was a million things that initially started it. But in the end, you could, as an overfunctioner, absolutely turn a normal functioner into an underfunctioner, right? Because if we need everything done a very particular way, or if we're just so quick to do it, and if that person's like, okay, I can do it, but I can't do it till tomorrow, I would just be like, oh, forget it. I'll just do it myself. It's easier. It's faster. I don't want to wait till tomorrow, So we want to be aware, because it also creates resentment in other people, as much as we think, oh, they're living the life of Riley, I'm doing everything, but not really, because they become a problem. Like we're managing the people in our lives rather than relating to them in a heart-centered way. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I explained it well, but
Yes, perfectly. And I love the idea of this new vocabulary and this new language that we have to get fluent in, which makes it so relatable and doable.
yes.
So I know when we last talked, Teri, because like our generation, we're trying to like heal ourselves and sort ourselves out and undo undo this stuff. So you evoked when we first talked about how important this is for young people and the younger generations, especially right now.
Yeah. Like, this is the skill set that is the difference between you becoming amazing and you becoming real leaders. And so what I found is that, because the book came out and I've done a lot of podcasts and press and whatever, that women in their 30s, so I was on the Almost 30 podcast, and I've sort of adopted those ladies, and there was about 6 or 7 different podcasts. One was a Gen X podcast called I Love You So Much. One was called I Have Cool Friends. Like, I just wanted to reach as many. And then I actually created something for this next generation called Boundary Boww Next Gen, really hitting the specific problems before they even get into the book or my courses that this generation is faced with. A different, right? If you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you have one set of problems because you were raised a particular way. And we weren't raised with cell phones coming out of our ears. Like I didn't even have a freaking cell phone until I was in my 30s because of when I was born. So this next generation, this is for you, and it's for all of us. Yet we need you so much to be in your authentic power, to be empowered. because there's so much wrong with the world, and we need real leaders and women who can hold their own. And men too, of course. This is not to negate the men, right? But a lot of my audience are women, because I'm a female empowerment expert. That's more of what I do. But it's so important, because we create disordered boundaries, creates our own glass ceiling. It's not the patriarchy. I mean, sure, we have disordered boundaries because of it, without a doubt, but it's us, because we have the power. And now you have the tools. With this book, if you did not one other thing, if you live in the middle of the desert somewhere and you just have this book, it will change your life. I promise you. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you. I spent my entire career creating something that would be so accessible that no matter where you were on this journey, if you were like, I don't even know a boundary from a piece of bread, you don't need to, because I just started from the beginning. And yet the book is it should be done in order. As much as there's lots of wisdom throughout, if you're walking through this process of transforming the way that you relate to boundaries, start at the beginning and go through the entire thing, because I have, exercises in each chapter, just one thing at a time. And for those of you who might be feeling the urgency, I always say this in my courses, because they're like, oh my God, I've realized I need to basically, make someone want to pick up a megaphone and be like, hey, everybody, everything's going to change. Like, there's a new boundary sheriff in town, people. And I always say, listen, there's no need, because what will happen is it is the small shifts within your own behavior, making a simple request. That's it. That's the beginning of this boundary revolution for most people. I'd like to make a simple request that you not drop your wet towel on my wood floor. Can you please hang it up on the back of the bathroom where there's a hook, right? The bathroom door. Rather than, and that maybe is a silly example, but what happens is when we don't do that, every time that friggin' wet towel is on the friggin' wood floor, we have an experience of resentment, constriction, anger. Why? It is not necessary. You can make the simple request. And here's the thing, another thing that we learn, if you're in the dating world, when you learn to set boundaries early and often, people will reveal who they are and what they're capable of long before you've invested 2 years of your life into a relationship with someone who is completely inflexible, but you didn't know it because you were too busy trying to please them. So it's important that we let our preferences be known, our desires be known, our limits known. You don't want to go to bed at midnight, or you don't like to eat dinner at 10 o'clock, or saying, hey, I would love to see you guys, but 10 is too late for me. Can we meet in the middle? How about we eat at 8:30? That's still late for me, but I'll do it. Like, why not negotiate for what you want? Because I promise you, not doing it, that's like getting on a train with one destination, and that destination is like Bitterland. There's no other place to go. If we abandon ourselves consistently, it makes us resent the people in our life and become those martyrs. Do you ever wonder how old mothers become martyrs? And you're like, I don't get it. They probably didn't start out that way. It's what happens when you abandon yourself, knowingly or unknowingly, right? Now you're becoming conscious of it. Amazing. Let's stop. But nobody is born wanting to become a martyr and guilting people by saying all the things I've done for you. How could you? No, we don't want that. Because when you negotiate for yourself, and when you get more fluent in this language of boundaries, you will be carrying so much less resentment, constriction, anger, rage. Like, we can actually put it down by speaking truthfully. But we start super small. It's going to take a little bit of time in your life. And hi, you've been doing this for decades. Don't feel like it's all going to change in 12 hours, because it isn't. But get committed to creating the life that you want. And I promise you that life is only possible through becoming masterful at boundaries, because contrary to popular belief, boundaries are not the blocks to deeper intimacy, abundant success. Boundaries are the bridge to all of those things.
I did say, ladies, that this will be one of the most important books that you'll ever read and that you'll never want to have it far from you. And I also think this is one of the most important conversations we've had on the House of Preeminence platform. I can't think of anything more foundational. It's absolutely rocked my world. I have one last question to ask you, Teri. This has just been absolutely phenomenal. Is what does preeminence mean to you?
It means excellence with ease and grace.
That grace is my favorite word. So there you go. Excellence with ease and grace and boundaries.
Yes.
And boundaries. So we are going to share all the links for people to find the book and your resources and the quiz and how to find you online, and because online is a kind of only thing we can do at the moment. So I really want to thank you from my heart for taking the time to come and share with the House of Preeminence platform. One of the most important messages that I think, well, I've ever heard, and that humanity's heard, and women here especially so many change makers are women out there in the trenches who are people pleasers because they're people helpers. So yep. I want to give you a huge hug of gratitude for the work that you're doing and the brilliance that you bring to it. This really is an important work. I am so blessed that you became a boundary boss and you're sharing your gifts with the world in this way. So thank you so much, Teri.
And thank you for having me, and thank you for amplifying the message. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. À la suite, as the French say. We'll see what happens next.